Reparations have been debated for decades without any results, but for the first time, financial compensation to make up for generations of wrongdoing against Black Americans seems to be potentially possible. Congress is poised to take up the issue with a bill to study how reparations would work and cost at the federal level, and the White House has given that study, or at least the bill for the study, the green light. However, one suburb of Chicago is not waiting for the federal government. Officials in Evanston, Illinois, have instituted a first-of-its-kind government-funded reparations program. Joining me now is MSNBC correspondent Tremaine Lee. So, Tremaine, explain to us how this is going to work.
Hey, Katie, thanks so much for having me. As you mentioned, Evanston, Illinois is taking a pretty bold step that we haven't seen elsewhere across the country, where they plan on using 3% of their recreational marijuana tax to fund home loans and mortgage assistance aimed at Black home buyers. And then the whole goal is to really shrink the mile-wide wealth gap between Blacks and whites that stems back from not just slavery, but decades and decades of Jim Crow and redlining and all the other kind of economic dispossession that Black folks have experienced in this country. I had the chance to speak with a few folks down in Evanston, and I would love to share it now. Let's take a listen. Evanston, Illinois, a community of 75,000, has traditionally stood in the shadow of nearby Chicago. But these days, it's in the spotlight, garnering international attention for a first-of-its-kind, government-funded slavery reparations program.
Reparations is to make amends for egregious crimes or actions against a community. And our local case for reparations in Evanston was found in housing.
Evanston's reparations program, spearheaded by Alderman Robin Rue Simmons, will use tax dollars generated by city marijuana sales to provide grants of up to $25,000 to eligible Black homebuyers. But while the $10 million program is being heralded by many, economist William Darity, co-author of From Here to Equality, says reparations need to be dispersed not at local levels, but at federal levels, and shouldn't be limited to programs aimed at home ownership or scholarships, as neither will erase centuries of violence, economic dispossession, and second-class citizenship.
The government either legally sanctioned some of those actions or turned a blind eye. So it's the federal government that we think is the culpable party.
Darity has calculated the amount that he believes the federal government owes descendants of enslaved people, not just for the period of enslavement and abuse, but for the decades of discrimination and redlining that followed.
We still find ourselves with mass incarceration, ongoing police executions of unarmed Blacks, a sustained process of discrimination in housing, credit, and employment markets.
How much are we talking here? The reparations, like the actual amount that it would take to make Black folks whole?
Well, the total bill would be in the vicinity of $10 to $12 trillion.
While reparations have been discussed in theory for decades, there's been a growing push to make them a reality.
He certainly would support a study of reparations.
From the White House to Congress, where growing attention is being paid to Bill H.R. 40, legislation aimed at studying the impact of slavery and reparations. Back in Evanston, Councilwoman Simmons is fielding calls from cities around the nation wanting to enact their own reparations programs. With $500,000 raised so far, city leaders say they're on their way to pay back what's owed.
The Black community of America is owed the right to enjoy humanity and the same livability as every other group in this nation. We are owed reparations.
Katie, there are a lot of folks across this country, Black people in particular, who see what's happening in Evanston as a good faith, good step, right? But they say the federal government was complicit all along in terms of Jim Crow and all of the terrible ways that Black folks have been stymied along the way, socially and economically. And that until the federal government steps up with a robust reparations program, this is nice, but don't even call it reparations almost, Katie.
You don't need to go back to slavery to say here's where the government went wrong. You can go back a generation, 2 generations to redlining and show how wealth has been built over generations among white families and how wealth was not built over generations among Black families because who was able to get mortgages, who was able to benefit from federally subsidized housing. In looking at this issue, and I know you know well about this, how much does housing, the owning of a home, have to do with righting the wrongs?
Oh, it's a tremendous step. I mean, when we think about how wealth is actually passed down, with the average white family having about 10 times the wealth of black families, you think about all that money invested in the home that you can then pass on, which was restricted during redlining, where federal programs weren't even insuring loans in certain areas where black folks were. It would go a long way in terms of shrinking that gap, Katie.
Tremaine Lee, Tremaine, thanks for bringing us that reporting. It is important, and we should be having this conversation. So thank you.